everybody. Happy Easter. I put up a little thing so that I don't have to clean my apartment anymore, right? I wanted to talk about resurrection because resurrection is actually my favorite trope in magic. I love it so much, and I wanted to take the opportunity while the globe is celebrating, some here, some there, the resurrection story of Christ. And, to me, the Bible is just a bad reality show that, everyone in the world got super hooked on. And it's everybody loves it, but they hate it at the same time because the people that are in it are making bad choices, but we can't stop watching because it's hilarious and weird and says something about our ego and ourself that we don't really want to confront. So maybe reading the Bible is just the same thing as watching Love is Blind and doing shadow work, at the same time, which has nothing to do with resurrection. Resurrection is actually pretty common in mythology. The fact that the Bible only, I think, mentions 2 or 3 resurrections is kind of a low resurrection to mythology ratio for some texts. A lot of gods and deities come back to life. And when we talk about religion and mythology and spirituality, the concept of life is really different. I think that, some of the ways that we relate to the Bible so much is that we are in a very material world since the Industrial Revolution. A lot of our energy has been put in to manifesting a world that we want, right, with physical things rather than emotional or conceptual things, which, there's value in that and there's not in a lot of ways. And we're kind of coming back around on the curve. But when we look at the Bible, we're looking at very earthy stuff, right? I think Christ is super smart, said a lot of great stuff. Maybe he didn't exist at all, but there is a lot of value in the Bible. And so when we talk about resurrection, I do kind of like to take it just as seriously when it's mentioned in the Bible as I would if it were mentioned in, a Greek mythology text, right? I mean, one example is Adonis. He dies and comes back to life every year. There's a lot of people that have gotten chopped up and then reassembled. So life and death is really popular as a means of communicating to us in the human realm our own mortality and our own resilience. And in some cases, concepts such as reincarnation, there's a lot of information around how Jesus wasn't immediately recognized when he came back. The lady that saw him for the first person to see him after the resurrection didn't really know who he was right off the bat. And so some people have theorized that the reason that is because he did appear in a different form. And things like ascension are sometimes symbols for reincarnation as well. And so one of the reasons that we see resurrection, I feel, so much is because it's helping us confront some of the feelings that we have about life and death. And then also it speaks to us on a personal level because I believe that we all undergo something called the resurrection in our lives. And this is something I talk about every time I am drunk. I think it's a really powerful way to conceptualize our trauma. And because I'm spiritual, it really helps me to conceptualize my own trauma. Some of the ways that resurrection has been used in history, there's a lot of stories about initiations to secret societies or thought schools. Before there were universities, there were other things that were fraternity style. And in order to get in, you would have to prove that you could keep the information that you learned in this secret society to yourself no matter what. That means even if someone held a gun to your head, you would not tell them the secrets that you learned here, right? Or disclose identities or whatever it was that they were trying to keep, right? Whatever they were trying to enclose in this little society. And so some of the ways that they would do that would be to actually beat up a person or create a situation where they thought that they were going to die. And then sometimes they would even costume themselves as other people trying to get the information. They would put people on psychedelic chemicals or herbs or whatever, and they would send them through this maze of tunnels. There's so many incredible stories where they would try to get information out of someone, and then that person, it would be up to them, and if they failed, then they were not initiated. But there's two folds to that. The second is that undergoing a feeling as if you had died is a really great way to live your life. So they would, put bullets or they would put gunpowder in a gun, but no bullets, and then shoot a person, and then there's that sensation of, have I just died? Some people have undergone near-death experiences where they feel that they have died, and when they emerge with this kind of new energy and this new attitude towards life, and it really is transformational. And so the ways that these societies, most of them on purpose, would try to emulate the feeling of creating death for someone is to make them feel as if they died. One way that they would do it is they would put a cage over this hole in the ground, blindfold a dude, put them under the cage, and they would get a bowl and open the bowl. I mean, there was a lot of symbology in this ceremony, but the bowl would be opened and all of the blood and the guts and the goo would come down on the person that was in the cage, and they would not know what was happening. Some people were even put in a coffin for 3 days. Some people died just trying to get initiated into these like whack-ass institutions, which, honestly, if I were alive then, I would not put it past myself if someone of my gender were allowed. So those are some of the ways that secret societies kind of embodied the religious archetype in a lot of ways through resurrection. But even before that, the concept of believing that you are dead is a really inspiring way to understand your life. And so we confront mortality by imagining what it's like to have life taken away from us. And so, we hear a lot now that it's a lot more common for people to be open about this kind of thing. I've seen death. I've been to hell and back. Those are leftovers from when we were using the resurrection archetype as a tool for managing our own relationship with mortality, with being able to function in society generally, because if we're constantly afraid of death all the time, we don't farm and we don't hunt and we don't fuck and we don't do the stuff that we're supposed to do. And so understanding resurrection within ourselves through deep meditation, psychedelic drug use, plant medicine, a lot of the rituals that they would do would kind of simulate heaven and death. There's a story that Lucifer comes to you in death and guides you through the solar system. And so those are plays that would be kind of enacted out for people, because the idea is that once you experience death, you're free to live, because then you come to the understanding that life is temporary, but our soul is not. And that is true for so many of these stories around resurrection and around acting out death in our life. And so my belief that we personally undergo resurrection through our trauma has kind of helped me reframe understanding what it's like to truly feel as if you're going to die at the hands of violence or insecure, living, things that make us feel as if we are not going to be able to go on. When you're doing kind of inner child trauma work with someone, often one thing that they'll look for is you using the word, "this is unbearable. I cannot live through this." Like if you're going back to either an early childhood memory, or some of us experience that break in our lives at certain points. Some of us, not until we're older. But for a lot of us that are doing the work now, we notice times when we really did not believe that we were either alive at the time of the incident or that we were going to live through it. And so those sensations and those experiences are heavy and hard to process. And so framing them as a personal resurrection for myself has been really useful and beneficial. And as we start to evolve mythology and spirituality in a new way now in this new age, I think that it might be useful for us, because we live in a culture now that wants and needs to be more cooperative and wants and needs to be at a more balanced understanding, to be on the same page with the rest of the globe, which is way easier now that we have the internet, but it's also way harder because humans have been around for so long and we've developed so much conflict over time, right? It's like we've been bad roommates this whole time because we didn't understand that we could text each other from our bedroom, and now we sort of get it, right? And so we're opening the door and we're coming to the kitchen table and we're starting to sit down and talk about how we can live collaboratively, and we don't really have as much cohesive religious or spiritual ways to kind of disseminate and understand that information. Mythology and stories and archetypes are generally how we communicate big information in like a small little pocket. And so as we're trying to heal like religious trauma and generational trauma that's been caused by white supremacy and colonization, political trauma that's been caused by governments gaining a lot of distrust by, their words not matching their actions, and now like a lot of direct lying. Like all of those things that have built within us this sort of like distrust and this anger and this stubbornness around cooperating around the globe, they are going to start to fall away. And so one of the ways that we can replace that quickly so that another institution doesn't fucking fill the vacuum is to understand the level where we understand our own resurrection and we understand our own experience. And then we take that experience and we zoom it out and we understand that a lot of human beings are experiencing a very similar sensation of being alive. And even if our perspectives and our upbringings are different, the sensation of being alive and the awareness of being alive is the same. And I would argue that that is the most crucial connection that we have as human beings, and that we want to honor that by protecting each other and serving each other the best that we can. And without a lot of healthy religious ways to do that, we can find ourselves a little lost. And so, adapting it to your own experience and understanding the ways that you can contribute by healing yourself, and then understanding the ways that when these holidays happen and we have Easter, it can either be a time where you reject Christians and you get mad at them and you don't take the time to understand what's underlying the holiday. And the unfortunate thing is that a lot of Christians actually don't take time to understand what is underlying the holiday, because we've lost our idea about mythology and collaborative information and communication through time, which is a lot of what mythology is just communication through time. And so if we fail to dig up and wash off I'm thinking of a beet. I'm thinking of harvesting a beautiful beet. There's this gross part, which is the Christianity part where you're you have to scoop away the worms and scoop away the dirt. And then you get out this thing and it looks kind of gross. And if you don't like beets, just replace it with whatever. And then you have to wash it, right? And then it's still a beet, but it has all of this gross Christianity on it that we sometimes don't really like anymore. And then for those of us that practice Christianity, that are surrounded by people that are dressing up like the Easter Bunny and treating their family and their neighborhood and the homeless population and people of color like shit on one end, while they say that they love Christ and his resurrection is blessed on the other. Even for people that are Christians, this can be a really hard, triggering holiday, because we see so many people out there acting as Christians that aren't really, following the message of Christ. And so my hope is that by understanding the context of resurrection and by seeing the ways that it's played out in the past and seeing the ways that it occurs in other mythology, that you could find a resurrection story that works for you, whether it is inside yourself or any of these texts. Or I encourage you to write your own. This is the perfect time for a new holy text to emerge. I imagine it's on the blockchain or something, and everyone's contributing to it, and there's weird fan fiction-y elements, and people are living and dying all the time. So if you want to get on that, I know I would appreciate it. So I appreciate your time. Happy Easter, happy resurrection, and I'm sending you lots of love.